In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme.
One of the most talked about moments from last night's debate, the former president repeating a false, unhinged claim, which his campaign has promoted, that immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, are eating people's pets.
Eating dogs. Yeah.
And moments after the debate ended, another huge headline. One of the biggest names in music, global superstar Taylor Swift, endorses Vice President Kamala Harris.
As Churchill would say, Willie, it's not the beginning of the end, it's into the beginning. But I don't know, with Taylor, maybe it is the beginning of the end. For Donald Trump, you know, I've got to say, our job is to analyze the debate last night. But I must say that, you know, one of the phrases, the catchphrases that have come up this election cycle has been sane washing. And you have mainstream people, mainstream media people that are trying their best to mold Donald Trump into a Bob Dole-like character, somebody that they can analyze as if he's any other candidate, as if this is any other election, as if last night was any other debate. It just wasn't. You had one candidate that was completely unhinged, just completely off his rocker. He looked badly. He looked old. He looked disconnected from reality. He looked enraged. He kept repeating the same things over and over again. Made no sense. There was no preparation on his side. And he resorts to internet rumors already debunked just because he has nothing to say. One of the most ill-prepared, well, the most ill-prepared presidential candidates we have ever seen in one of these debates. One of the angriest, and I got to say, hunched over. Look at it, it's eye squinting. The split screen was extraordinary. So this morning, for people on any network, even those who get paid to lie about Donald Trump every day, there's no sane washing this, and there's no normalizing this, and there's no pretending that that was any other candidate, this is any other election, or that was any other debate.
Yeah, we've been encouraging people for a long time to not grade Donald Trump on a curve, to not say, well, that's what he does. No, this guy wants to be president of the United States again. So watch that debate last night and ask yourself if that's a person who should be back in the White House, who should be near the nuclear codes. We're going to show all of these moments, but just to summarize quickly, in addition to his claim, which was made up on the internet, and by the way, the person who took the photograph of the guy carrying the goose down the street spoke out yesterday and said, that wasn't in Springfield, Ohio. I have no idea if that guy was an immigrant, if he was Haitian or anything else. So more debunking of that incredible moment yesterday when Donald Trump, former president of the United States, is screaming about people eating dogs. It didn't happen. He praised, when asked about foreign policy, praised only Viktor Orban, the authoritarian leader of Hungary. He would not say whether he wants Ukraine to win the war when asked many times. Effectively siding with Vladimir Putin there, defended his actions leading up to and on the day of January 6th, and defended the mob that desecrated the Capitol and beat up cops that day. went back to the well, even, Joe, of defending what he did around the Central Park Five. Said, well, actually, at the time, I mean, why go back to that? He was asked about it, but why even attempt to rationalize or defend calling for the death penalty for 5 young men who ultimately were exonerated? And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So there's no more grading Donald Trump on a curve. He wants to be president of the United States again. Yeah. Watch those 90 minutes last night and ask yourself, which of those two people is more fit to be president?
And for anybody who is frustrated watching Donald Trump lie again and again unchecked, I will say that last night was validation, finally, watching him get called out. Not necessarily by the moderators, though they did make an attempt to try, although he talked over them and they didn't turn him off. But Kamala Harris was superb. She was elegant. She was classy. But she also was joyful, and then she also went right in there and baited him over and over and over again, and he fell for it every time. And I think the moment that really was the unraveling was when she invited all Americans to attend a Trump rally and to see the lies in person and to see how tired and boring the rallies are, to hear about Hannibal Lecter and other things. And he just lost it from there on. In fact, we can play that.
Let's play it real quick.
Take a look.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
And from there on out, Joe, it just went downhill for him. He could not handle hearing that his rallies are boring and that people get up and leave.
You know, Willie, it's interesting that when you're listening to music and you're trying to really figure out what's going on in a performance, it really is always best. Quincy Jones would always tell people, if you want to know what's going on, turn your back to who's performing or just close your eyes. That's how you hear the music. Here, I would say just the opposite. If you want to get exactly where a debate's going, turn the sound off. Use your eyes. And visually, the split screens are so stark. When you do that, you see Kamala Harris smiling, mocking, putting her hand underneath her chin, going, are you really saying that? And at one moment in that bizarre exchange about dog eating, she actually looked like she was feeling sorry for the man because he was so detached from reality.
Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't look at her. I mean, if you go through those 90 minutes, you probably count 2 or 3 times when he even glanced over. Yeah, he's scowling, he's uncomfortable. And I think, John, one of the big tells, and we've heard from a lot of Republicans who concede privately that this went just terribly for Donald Trump. And actually, I heard some praise for Kamala Harris's performance, even from Republicans. Democrats obviously excited about it. Was about 30 minutes into the debate, we started to see online and now on the front page of a major newspaper that it was the moderators' fault. Blame the moderators. They're ganging up because a handful of times they fact-checked Donald Trump on egregious lies. You also know that it didn't go well because Donald Trump showed up in the spin room. Donald Trump himself last night after the debate, to try to sort of reimagine what happened in that room last night. The Harris campaign calling immediately for a second debate. We'll see if there is a second debate. They feel confident about it. The Trump campaign resorting to blaming the moderators for what their candidate did in that room.
Yeah, if you're showing up in the spin room, you've lost. If you're blaming the moderators, you've lost. And Trump, we should note, was non-committal about whether he would debate Harris again. The Harris team very much say, hey, let's get a second date on the books for October. The split screen, as noted, was so effective for Harris. The way she smiled and sort of almost mocked him at times, just looking in disbelief. I can't believe I'm sharing the stage with someone who's saying things like that. And she threw him off right at the beginning. She walked over for that handshake. He clearly didn't expect it. That set a tone for the night. The first 15, 20 minutes, relatively even when they talked about the economy. But once we went to the crowd size, once they started talking about abortion, which was an issue that Trump twisted himself in knots and to try to explain his shifting stances, but at the same time made clear that he was proud of the Supreme Court justices that he nominated that overturned Roe v. Wade before falsely claiming that all Americans wanted this settled, the issue settled by the states, and the vice president scored some points there. And there were so many moments here where she just got the best of him, and he looked old, he looked out of touch. And he looked like he was speaking, Joe, to just a small Republican ecosystem, not winning over any new votes at all.
That's what's so bizarre.
And we should note, it took a while to get there last night, but he was asked. Not just about January 6th, where he defended his actions, but he was asked about the 2020 election. And he repeatedly would not say that he lost.
And by the way, for people, again, that have to lie constantly, trying to normalize Donald Trump, there's so much they can't run away from. You know, his own campaign staff begging him to stop lying about a stolen election. He couldn't do it. He could not say that he wanted Ukraine to be able to push back the Russian invaders. Would not say it. He would not say repeatedly whether he was going to push a national ban for abortion on American women. Would not say it. Was asked afterwards as he was leaving the debate. He would not answer that question on whether he supported a national ban or not. You go down the list. He time and time again would not say he did anything wrong on January 6th. Again, there was nothing normalized about him. His performance was absolutely terrible, and there were many people who actually dared to say the truth. It was the worst debate performance in history. And you had a lot of Trump supporters on Twitter, in the media, saying it was one of the worst debate performances they ever saw. And they could blame ABC all they wanted to. Blaming those two? You can't get past that? No. Seriously? I mean, is he that bad? He's going to take on dictators all over the world and can't handle the truth about eating cats in Springfield, Ohio? I mean, seriously.
Right out of the box on Fox News, Brit Hume said she won hands down. There's no other way to look at it. Others tried to make up stuff, but there was nowhere to go.
They have nothing.
Also.